Hello, this is Laura Magdalene Eisenhower, and I am joined by a very special guest, Adam Apollo Amorastreya. I have been crossing paths with him for quite a number of years at different events and have always looked forward to more connecting time. He's a very amazing galactic being with so much to offer. I saw his talk in Detroit when we were both attending a conference there, and I was blown away by his presentation. So I've invited him to be a guest speaker at the Asceti Ranch retreat called Be the Shift, Awakening Galactic Consciousness and Unity Consciousness. And he will be presenting 2 hours worth of material and also some interactive, more intensive stuff that everybody can participate in. So let me tell you a little bit about Adam. Adam Apollo has offered insights on global transitions, physics, technology, human spirituality, and our interstellar future as a leadership ambassador at the White House and multiple summits at the United Nations and at conferences and festivals around the world. After having a vision of the universe as a fractal hologram at the age of 15, he extensively studied a wide variety of branches in theoretical astrophysics, completing major research papers on the potential interface between consciousness and the physics of space-time by the time he graduated high school. So there's a lot more to share about Adam, but he's also the founder of the Unify movement and several education and technology-based companies and organizations, as well as a faculty member and the lead systems architect for several international online academies. These include the Resonance Academy for Unified Physics, the Guardian Alliance Academy for Self-Mastery, and the Visionary Arts Academy. He currently has over 6,000 active students of all ages from around the world. Adam Apollo is dedicated to achieving a sustainable and thriving interplanetary culture. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Yes, well, I'm very excited that you're going to be joining me and I guess 3 or 4 other guests at the Asceti Ranch conference. I was so captivated by your interview, or excuse me, not your interview, your presentation in Detroit. It was just so polished. It was the way you delivered it, and the ending and the inspiration and the information is incredible. And just, you know, you and your partnership and the sacred union relationship that you're embodying and your wife's amazing creativity have just been a source of incredible inspiration for me. So I could go on, but I want you to just share with our audience some background information about you, and just, we covered a little bit in the bio, but maybe you could just sort of fill in the gaps a little bit so we can understand you some more.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. And thank you for your gratitude around that presentation in Detroit. I still hope to get the video from those guys at some point, and then we can share it with your audience and with my audience and let more people see that. It was definitely a fun presentation. I really enjoyed being there. And I'm excited to go back in November to that conference again. And maybe we can mention that later. You're speaking there again this year as well?
No, not this year.
Not sure. Okay. Yeah. So as far as my background, you know, a lot is covered in the bio. My bio has evolved many, many, many times, obviously. But when I was a teenager, I basically discovered that I had an energy body and an energy field, and independently began studying the dynamics of the human energy field by doing different types of experimentation, locating objects with blindfolds, using blindfolds and doing martial arts, exploring different dynamics in weather and the growth of plants and the flow of water and the way that a fire responds to speaking and to consciousness. And I was actively studying this whole realm of metaphysics while also exploring not only the insights of ancient cultures throughout history that have already attained many of these gifts and these keys. You know, you can find it in the descriptions of ki or chi or prana or odic force, or the ways that energy is woven through Celtic knotwork. Cultures around the planet have described these fundamental principles in the fabric of space and given tool sets to their people for thousands of years. But it's only recently that we're kind of coming back into an awareness of this. And so a lot of my studies then branched into theoretical physics, and I started looking for the answer in physics behind these kinds of deep innate phenomena. And I studied special and general relativity extensively, studied quantum mechanics and different forms of quantum mechanics, and studied leading edge theories in string theory, loop quantum gravity, and a variety of other fields. And in that process, I began to start to see a sort of unified picture behind the scenes. I started to understand and see how there were principles in string theory that were correct, although because of its background independence and it's the way that string theory is approached, it's too abstract and it's not going to actually form a classical physical description of space-time. But I also saw how loop quantum gravity had elements of what is correct, understanding that space-time itself is a structure. And I began to understand that Einstein's theories, along with some of these quantum mechanical approaches, specifically in loop quantum gravity, pointed towards this more fundamental realization, which is really the restoration of the ether. The awareness that the fabric of space itself is a tactile, tangible substance full of energy, and that we are completely entangled with the universe, the entire universe at all times. And we have the capacity through our consciousness to not only communicate faster than light, but actually initiate changes in the fabric of space around us, and actually have a conversation with space-time. And this is what ancient cultures have been trying to share with us for thousands of years.
Oh, that's so huge. Because I am particularly just amazed at the part about the ether that you mentioned. I talk a lot about where that needs to be restored. So very well put, and just really just amazing to just kind of integrate that and connect those dots, and to have that sort of openness all throughout your upbringing and just your life, to be able to, really present it and connect, people to it. What was it like presenting in places like United Nations and White House? As we know, those are some interesting structures filled with all sorts of interesting beings. And with a frequency like yours and the knowledge base of yours, tell us a little bit about how that all happened and what that experience was like. And
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I've had to kind of weigh out how much of the process of how I got into that whole situation to make public, because my mission at the White House and the UN initially was kind of sparked through kind of a secret, like let's get him in there and let's get this information into these people and what they're doing there. I won't name names, but I'll just say that I have a colleague who's been an organizer of youth philanthropists for a long time and young leadership from around the world, mostly children who are kids of some of the wealthiest families on the planet, but also many young, empowered individuals that have created nonprofit organizations and other NGOs that are dedicated to making major changes in short amounts of time. And I was identified as a young leader in this way because I was working with Campaign 2020 and the 2020 Fund. I'd just done I'd spoken as the keynote speaker at a gala dinner for the International Symposium on Digital Earth about sustainability and about the future perception of the planet and the ramping up of technology and the potential for humanity to become an extraterrestrial species, and the importance of actually honoring and taking care of this planet that we're on in that whole process. And so this colleague of mine invited me to come as a speaker to speak on environment and education and future consciousness of humanity and where we're going. But he also knew at that time, and after many meetings and conversations, he realized that I have a lot to share about our relationships with galactic species and about the specific technologies that are sort of essential for humanity to achieve in order to attain a galactic culture and actually make this transition from sort of a state of energy and spatial lockdown to a space of energy independence, distributed energy systems, freedom of travel and movement, either through teleportation or starships, freedom of material resources by things like replicators. And so he wanted me to come to the White House to basically see if I could onboard as many of these youth that were there as possible to some of these deeper ideas and sort of test the waters and see how many of them are interested in new energy systems, new technologies, even if they're interested in crop circles, it could be a great in to discussing and opening up some ideas. So I accepted and I went. The conference was called the Next Generation Leaders, Next Generation Leadership. And it was interesting. We were kind of in these different side rooms in the White House buildings. The security was very intense, obviously. And a lot of the sessions were actually quite inspiring and quite beautiful. A lot of the sessions that we had really were generative conversations in which different youth ambassadors from all over were bringing in different really critical ideas, and we were mind mapping all of these ideas from new tech to what the social needs of the populace are to et cetera. And we talked a lot about, creating the village 2.0, creating town center 2.0. Like, how do we really reconnect communities in this age of massive digital overload, and in a time when people are feeling really disenchanted and disconnected with politics and the governing bodies because of so much corruption? How do we bring the power back into the hands of the people? And, I can tell you that probably one of my favorite moments of that entire experience was actually speaking with some White House aides and having a conversation with them about where we're going and what the future holds. And what they told me very specifically was like, look, the reason you guys are here, the reason the Obama set this up for you guys to be here is that we need you to know that we can't make all these changes that you're envisioning from the inside. We know that you have to be the ones to make the changes. So we're here to empower you to step forward and to make these things happen. Anything that we can do to support you, we will, because this system inside here is locked down. And they also shared with me that, our conversation basically evolved to, looking at what does the future of the earth look like? And I presented some ideas around, like, what do you think about distributed community-based organizations on the planet, where the communities are interconnected as a planetary whole, but also each represent themselves and have their own basic law structures and rule structures and social structures that support the needs and the desires of those individual communities at like a city level, at a village level, at very small scales, but connected to the big scale. And one of the White House aides looked at me and he said, "You mean the end of the nation state?" And I was like, "Yeah, what do you think?" And he's like, "It's actually not a bad idea." And that response clicked something for me. It changed my perception of what was going on inside of this whole system that I was playing inside of. And I realized that I actually had tons of allies inside there. People that were deeply, passionately working to make the changes that would really support, you know, the social justice, the economic justice, all the great things that Bernie Sanders talks about. There are people working tirelessly inside of this bureaucratic systemic structure that has massive flaws and massive corruption to try to heal those flaws and to try to combat that corruption. And that's been going on for a very, very long time. But, you know, it's also like a crazy train, and it's really difficult to turn a train that big, you know, and get it to go on to some new tracks. But there's lots and lots of people working on that. And I feel like a lot of success has happened since the time that I was there in the White House, and also my time in the UN and sessions around the UN. I think there's been immense progress, and I'm seeing that progress because we actually have so many of these ideas now exposed in the political system, in the Democratic Party. Like, it's opened up, and never before have these ideas really been put forward so strongly, so transparently, and so openly.
Right. And even if we don't see that in the news or in the propaganda that's being shared, you know, it's like it could eventually crack through. And it's just really great to hear, because I just have my reactions and triggers about a lot of it. And but I know that in order to change it, there needs to be some level of penetration and alchemy there, and not the total avoidance. And always trying to find that balance with it, particularly coming from a presidential line. It's just like, so I like that you're carrying that, because it's just like, okay, that's where I can breathe within, you know, that particular aspect of this reality. So what about your thoughts on like transhumanism? I mean, you cover a lot of high sort of technological, I mean, you share a lot of information that's based in technology, but spirituality.
Yeah.
And that's why your voice is so important, because that integration is critical. When you see this I mean, how can we really tell the difference? What can you suggest to people when they're seeing some sort of scientific breakthrough here, and over there you've got this? And I mean, it might come down to the people, it might come down to the way it's presented, and just, I mean, I feel like I have a pretty good idea, but I think a lot of people are just like, okay, we're wanting to have these upgrades, which is who and what is what.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue. What you said around that, you know, integrating spirituality is the key. You're absolutely right on that front. And, you know, when I think about transhumanist agenda and the structures and things that are really focused on that, I always think back to my meetings with Doug Engelbart, which happened at the International Symposium on Digital Earth. Doug Engelbart, if you don't know, is the guy who invented the mouse, right? And he was a brilliant visionary. He created hypertext transfer protocol, HTTP, you know, that little thing that you type in or that shows up anytime you go to a website. Yeah, well, that's because of Doug Engelbart. He's basically one of the founders of the internet itself. And these guys were doing video chats like in the 80s. I mean, it's absolutely amazing the kind of stuff they were working on. And his original mouse was actually a keyboard too. And his kids learned how to use it. And they could type like 5 times faster than you could on a regular keyboard by using these little binary impulses just on your 5 fingers, and, you know, typing full sentences and paragraphs and moving, you know, also a cursor around and that kind of thing. But the main industries didn't think that was going to work, and that it would be too complex for people. So that's where you ended up getting, you know, this basic little 2-button mouse instead of being able to type and work this little thing around to move around on a screen. But, you know, basically, during my conversations with Doug Engelbart, one of the things that he said to me was that technology is designed to augment our natural abilities, not replace them. In other words, we already have the ability to communicate. We already have the ability to send our consciousness and to actually have telepathic experiences. And many people have had these kinds of experiences For others that have not had them, they might seem more like science fiction. And certainly there are forces in media out there that would love for you to believe that those types of things are only science fiction and they're not a part of our integrated reality. But they are capacities that we have. And there are plenty of studies out there to show that these kinds of things happen. Just look at some of the research of Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Group, for example, over the past 20, 25 years, to see some of the data and the research that shows that humans have powerful extrasensory capacities. So as we get into, technology ramping up towards what Kurzweil would call the singularity, and this massive acceleration of data storage and data processing and the capacity for machine learning, we've seen this very real possibility of emergence, and maybe it already has in some cases, of what many people call artificial intelligence. And there tends to be this fear around this artificial intelligence idea that says that, what if the machines become smarter than us and they don't like us and they decide they want to get rid of us? This is the old Terminator story, or the Matrix story. There's plenty of reflections of that fear that we have in our collective psyche. And there's also a lot of media out there and a lot of people that are whistleblowers that talk about artificial intelligence programs, and they also talk about sort of the more obvious layers of those programs in which there is some kind of brainwashing going on. In other words, people are being made to believe something that isn't true through a story or a program that they're being given. Now, that piece is something I think everybody can relate to. There's a reason why television shows are called television programming. When you watch a specific type of media or certain kind of show, there are programs that you are receiving, and those programs are going in and they're changing your consciousness, right? And so there's an actuality to that process of our consciousness being programmed by external forces. But it's also a choice. We can choose what programs we take on and what programs we don't. We also are programming everything around us all the time by what we share. Right now, I'm programming you if you're listening to this, and I'm also giving you keys to your own programs so that you can unlock doors and begin to see more of what your whole belief infrastructure actually is, and maybe discover where there might be some programs or beliefs that aren't serving you as well as they could be. And perhaps by unlocking that awareness, you might be able to upgrade some of those belief systems or change some of those programs and actually experience life in a more beautiful, deep, impassioned, inspiring way on a daily basis, perhaps with a little less fear. And that's part of my work here in this world, is to help pass out some keys here and there where they need to be dropped. But I don't want to tangent too far off of the point here, because the point really around transhumanism is that technology is a part of us. We are a technology, and the things that we create are technological tools that are meant to assist us, from creating a glass that can hold water that allows us to then drink that water, to creating a pen that allows us to write, to creating a phone that allows me to not only think of someone on the other side of the planet, but actually call them and talk to them now. That's augmentation. I have the ability to communicate with someone in San Francisco right now through astral projection or through remote viewing or through telepathic direct person-to-person contact, which most people have experienced. If you're a parent, I'm sure you know the moment when your energy just turns on and all of a sudden you feel your kid and you know something's going on, and sure enough, you go over there and they need you right then. That's telepathy. Every mom can attest to that kind of experience. It's just not articulated as that so much. And so we realize eventually that everything around us, all of space-time, is conscious. Everything is actually built with intelligence. From the wood that builds your house, to the plants outside, to what's growing in your garden, to what's moving in your body, to the way the air is moving around you, to the water that you're drinking, there is an innate intelligence and consciousness based in the fabric of space-time. And consciousness expresses itself through anything that has the capacity to hold that consciousness and allow that consciousness to be expressed. And so as you build computers and as you build technologies, even cars, even more simplistic things that are more complex structures that have the capacity to allow consciousness to be expressed in more ways, consciousness will express through them. Now, when you create a vehicle like a machine learning device, an intelligent robot or an intelligent computer, you also gain the ability for consciousness to inhabit that device. Now, is that device better or worse than being in a human body? Well, I can tell you from my experience, the technology of this is so far advanced beyond where even the wildest transhumanist dreams have gone that they don't even realize the technology that we're actually inside of right now. They don't even get it because they're not even aware of the fact that this body has vorticular chakric wheels moving through it that are actually bringing in, porting to different layers of the fabric of space-time, that there is geometric structures going on in this body, meridian lines. There is the capacity to tap the 0-point field, build up charge and chi, and release it. There's the capacity to travel with this conscious field outside of this body and come back into this body. These are all technologies that we have innately inside of us that aren't even being considered in the technological development of AI. And the idea that there is even artificial intelligence to me is actually quite laughable. The idea that you could create something that's artificial or that's non-conscious or that doesn't have a spirit or that doesn't have a soul, to me is ludicrous. But that's because I see, even in that tree, even in the flow of the space around me, I see spirits. I see consciousness. I see and feel the energy of that which is, and that there is this full intelligence all around me all the time in the fabric of space, no matter what.
Yes. Yes. That's very well put. And we absolutely are the most advanced technology. Everything else is an imitation being fed back to sort of really not allow us that experience or unfolding or those activations. And what's great is you do so much in the physical and in the practical in order to move the body, the human vessel, into alignment, which is so important because we can think all we want, but we really need to embody. I want to kind of go into the galactic history stuff. You've done a lot of interviews. You did one particularly with Alfred Weber that went into just some of the scenarios and wars that we're sort of still playing out and resolving. And you have an interesting take that often, might get misunderstood just because there's some trigger words there. But
yeah.
I know this is kind of a vast question, but is there any way you can sort of summarize just kind of why we're where we are right now and what some of the origins are of the symptoms we're seeing today and what is needed in order to push it forward into these higher earth energies?
Yeah, I can do my best to summarize that in a very short amount of time. For those of you who are deeply interested in that question and in really looking at our ancient origins as a species and also as a branch of many species from around the galaxy, I highly encourage you to watch this video. If you look up The Real Star Wars with Adam Apollo, or even just the real Star Wars, I think it should come up. But um, you can check that out, and it's also on the Guardian Alliance site for those of you that are aware of that academy that I have. And it's something that it took me in that particular interview, it took me 3 hours with slides and presentations to really set the context and to tell the entire story and the whole arc of the tale in such a way that I could help people to really understand these concepts in a very grounded and anchored way, through the transpersonal psychology processes that I used to gain that awareness. So to tell it in a very short form, basically I have to kind of set a little bit of a context. So, if it's your audience, Laura, I trust, is probably more open to most things than most people. But it's still good to set context and to have a little bit of a framework for understanding how someone approached something and the way that they went about doing something, especially when it's about information that is very difficult otherwise to verify. And I find that there's a lot of channeling, a lot of disclosure, a lot of whistleblowing that just has a lot of fantastic information, and there's also pretty much no way to verify whether it's true or not unless someone has had their own personal experience with something. And unfortunately, this is the case of these metaphysical sciences that we're in right now. And I say metaphysical because they're story sciences. They're based on experience. They're based on first person subjective experience. But at the same time, we can verify those experiences by having our first person subjective experience and then hearing someone else's first person subjective experience and discovering that there's a connection between the two. And the connection points, I think, are worth mapping. And that's the work that I've gone about through this journey. And it's defined as transpersonal psychology, where you basically, are getting data of different people's experiences, and you're looking at those experiences and you're finding the parallels. You're seeing where they coincide. You're seeing where they map to each other. And so over many, many years, I did this because I was having memories with other friends and people that I was encountering. And the numbers of who those people were continued to grow and grow and grow over the years until I literally have had hundreds of recall experiences with individuals having a simultaneous awareness of living in another time and having very specific experiences, very tactile experiences, very emotional experiences, and oftentimes having to move through healing processes to recover and reclaim that information and accept those experiences in the now, especially because some of them are very, very foreign to the kinds of things that we have in our experience in our daily life now at this time. And so through that journey, what I became aware of in short form is that there's a very long history across this galaxy of many different kinds of interactions between different species. If we go back to the time of Atlantis, we see on this planet, we see this merging of different star seeds and different civilizations coming in from all over the galaxy to come to Earth to help and to assist in the renaissance that is occurring on the planet. As the ice age comes in and there's all this ice in the poles and civilization is gathering together, there's this massive potential, the building of the Tower of Babel, so to speak, for humanity to reach the heavens and to actually become part of this galactic community. But unfortunately, it wasn't able to happen at that time, as all of us are aware, because we're still here and we're not part of this whole galactic community that's going on. But this wasn't the only time either that galactic species have come from different parts of the galaxy or even from other galaxies to address major challenging situations that have happened in our universe. And another time in which this occurred was a long time before Atlantis. If you were going to chart it in the cycles of Earth year times or Earth ages, it would be something like another 13,000 years back before the time of Atlantis in Earth consciousness cycle. So, obviously there's no way to chart exact solar timelines back to certain extents when you're dealing with entire other regions of the galaxies and other galaxies. And there's no way to actually use our solar timeline as a marker on Earth for the amount of years, which is also why, for those of you listening in, always take years with a grain of salt. When someone says the Orion Wars happened 1,563,000 years ago, it's like, well, how do you know that? I mean, are you actually charting that on Earth time? Like, are you using the solar cycles of the Earth around the sun to chart the events happening in another constellation? Like, or not? Because you're obviously not clear about that. And there's many different timelines that have been brought forward by different channels. And I think a lot of those different timelines are based on the fact that these individuals, they actually just simply don't have the scientific knowledge to translate those time perceptions into clear and accurate timelines that we could then associate with Earth timelines. And for the most part, they actually don't matter at all, because time continues flowing and how you measure it is just based on how you measure it. So I'll just say some amount of time before Atlantis, similar to, like, if we look from now back to Atlantis, that amount of kind of time from Atlantis looking back in Earth perception would be around when this was going down. And what happened was that there was a couple major things that went down. One is that the Arcturians, who basically had been developing and mastering genetic research and genetic studies for thousands and thousands of years, for a very, very long time, many generations of Arcturians, they were testing and practicing and developing different ways to merge genetics from very, very diverse species, and exploring what would happen if you had bird being with humanoid being, or fish being with humanoid being, or cat being with humanoid being. Like, what do these combinations do, and how does consciousness embody in these combinations? And one of these particular combinations they really wanted to try was the merging of the dragon DNA with the humanoid DNA. And when I say dragon DNA, I mean massive, multi-story, huge, 100-foot long to 1,000-foot long, massive creatures, very, very much like the ones articulated in almost every cultural tradition around the planet, from the Druids to Chinese to etc. Many different kinds of dragons, and different dragons from many different star systems. And they were seeking to bridge these dragon tribes and the consciousness of these dragon tribes who have this very, very deep attunement with the structure of the fabric of space in their consciousness. And so who are actually able to warp space-time, like invoke fire into space-time, warp water, like move the elements. If you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, how the different martial arts forms are about moving different elements, this is similar to what the dragons actually had the innate capacity to do. Their consciousness was deeply interwoven with that fundamental etheric field. and it was a huge gift. And also their ability to take extremely diverse structures of information and digest that information into total coherence. Both of these are huge gifts of the dragon tribes. And so the Arcturians decided to go and get some dragon DNA, and there were a group of dragons in Andromeda that they selected. And when I say Andromeda, I mean the Andromeda galaxy. And so they actually traveled to another galaxy, went to some of these worlds, and basically secretly, as if possible, took dragon DNA from a series of different dragons and different dragon races. And they brought that DNA back, and they decided to start experimenting with merging that dragon DNA with humanoid forms. And so as they began to do this, they basically raised this little series of villages on a planet and seeded this planet with this dragon humanoid DNA. And these beings that began to be born, they were, smaller, like humanoid, like oftentimes with a little bit of a hunch, little raptor-like arms, sometimes more articulate than others, depending on the dragon type. Some of them were very, very kind of physically challenged in these new bodies, and others, were more established and kind of merged with the genetics better. And this little group of draconian beings, or what eventually would be called the reptilians, began to evolve and began to, develop their own culture. But what was happening was that as these beings started really populating, souls of dragons who were dying in Andromeda or leaving their bodies, which they would do at regular cycles to be reborn into their own family line. They would often be born as the son of their son or their grandson. And there was this sort of weave of lifetimes and spiritual interconnections within families that the dragons had as a fundamental principle for their lives and for their way of being and their way of living. Honor was about genetics. Honor was about this interconnection. And so basically, when some of these dragons started leaving their bodies, they were literally dying, and then they were following their genetic strand to be born into the next body, but they were ending up in this galaxy. And they were ending up in these little reptilian bodies, and they were born into them not knowing what the heck is going on. And you better believe they were really upset. They were really upset. And the experience of being confined, this massive being that you're used to, being confined down into this little body, was like so much pressure and so much intensity that they were just enraged. And the whole reptilian culture became centered around these beings trying to prove how big they are and how strong they are and who they really are, trying to access that power inside of them through these bodies that were awkward and very unfamiliar. And so their culture became very much like Klingon culture, if you're familiar with Star Trek, where battle and showing your prowess and etc. was like the main impulse. Now, what began to happen was that the dragons in Andromeda, some of the dragon tribes, became aware that the Arcturians had stolen this DNA and that there was a bunch of dragons being born into this other galaxy because they are psychically tuned to some of their own family members, and they're like not being born here, they're being born in this other galaxy. And what the fuck? And so they basically a bunch of there's this huge conclave of dragons, and a bunch of these dragon lords decide with rage and anger that they're going to leave their bodies and they're going to travel to the Milky Way, and they're coming here and they're going to be born into these reptilian beings, and they're going to go out and they're going to destroy as many of these humanoid races as possible to wipe this scourge from existence that have stolen their honor, that have stolen their bloodlines, that have raped their DNA and taken it from them without their consent, without their choice and their will, and to make the humans pay, to make the humanoids pay. Now, not all dragons were like this. And for me and my dragon tribe, who was there also, we realized that this was a serious problem, and that going to the Milky Way and trying to destroy the humanoids in response was absolutely the wrong choice. And that was not the way to restore the honor. And that these very angry, dark dragon lords that were deciding to die and come here, you know, could basically create a massive rift in the universal fabric and actually destroy so much life that that didn't need to be destroyed. That was beautiful. That was part of creation. And so a massive fleet of other dragon families got together and decided that we were going to also do this, but we're going to go and embody in humanoid forms, and we're going to try to stop this invasion from happening. And so basically, many of us left our bodies and we went and incarnated into species in star systems around where that reptilian planet was. And many of us incarnated as She-Haley, which were the first species to kind of get raided by the reptilians once they got off planet and developed star technology. And some of us incarnated as Pleiadians and Sirians and Arcturians and Johannians and many other species, Lyrians and different species around. But many incarnated in species as close to this nexus point as possible, distance-wise. And to make a very long story short, the reptilian, the dragon lords came in, they started raiding different planets. We fought them like crazy. They destroyed worlds. Stuff hit the fan. It was the real Star Wars, and it was interplanetary battles and people being captured and held prisoner, and lots of horror stories of reptilians, doing experimentation and trying to create their own hybrids, and lots of different species going to battle, and having to try to basically take out these Death Stars, these reptilian programming hubs that the reptilians were using to run massive robotic armies, because they discovered very quickly also that using robots to fight is a lot better than fighting with your own skin and flesh and blood. And so getting those shut down was a big deal, as well as dealing with the Zetas who were brought in to protect the galaxy as the kind of stormtroopers, and having to destroy the programming hubs that were taking over their programs as well, and causing them to fight against many of the other species in the galaxy. So obviously there's a lot of information there, and so I gave you a lot more early context that I didn't talk about so much in the interview with Alfred Weber, but I recommend people check that out and listen to it. To wrap it into the present moment though, that stuff went down. It was crazy, but the Rebel Alliance won. The Death Stars were destroyed. The reptilians were pushed back to their home planet. There was quarantine set up. The Zetas have been being healed for thousands of years. But the thing is that soul travel is something that's beyond our capacity to control. In other words, you can create, force fields around entire solar systems, but you can't control a soul. When a soul dies and goes through the spirit world, they can choose to travel and incarnate any way they want to. And so a lot of these ancient dragon lords that were not able to destroy everything at that time and still have this trauma and still have this pain have been incarnating in other species and eventually in humanity. And so some of them have been here on Earth replaying this whole story and still living out this trauma that their bloodline is important, and that that's what is most important to honor. And these humans, they're all less than us. They're not dragons, they're just slaves, they should just be serving us because they did this to us so long ago. It's still a victim story, and it's a victim story that's causing perpetration over and over and over and over again. And for those of us that can see it, we're still here trying to heal that deep wound. And I believe healing that ancient dragon wound is the core wound that is causing these reptilian and draconian activities on the planet of attempted control and yes, self-destruction, really, as a species.
Right. What do you feel? So, like with the Dracos and just us as a food source, I mean, where does that come in, where our energies are being siphoned and we're sort of being fed upon, and there's this sort of panic of, I mean, there's a survival thing going on there where they have compromised DNA or something to be in control in order to not blend into this whole unification process so that they can still hold their ground with that victim story. Is that why it's so vampiric? Because they just use this as food, and it's, I mean, there's different factions, I know, different controller groups, but.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about vampirism and using people's energies, what's important to realize is that, anytime you do magic to like connect into the fields and you're using real magical principles, well, you are both programming the field and you're receiving energy from the field, right? And there's a lot of ancient magical principles that the dragon tribes have brought here for thousands of years and in many, many different cultures. And there's this innate wisdom of how to work with these fields in the fabric of space. And so many of the rituals of, I would say, some of the darker Freemasonry orders at the high levels, and some of the, there's a variety of different secret societies and groups that have used different magical practices to control people for a long time. And the thing is that internally within these societies, the structure that's set up to onboard and to bring new initiates in, and then make sure that those initiates are going to follow these stairs, and then make sure that those initiates, when they get to these levels, they're going to continue to fulfill the agenda of the ones at the top, is such a controlled structure that process of the magic of bringing those initiations and initiates up to those levels and bridging them and onboarding them, all of that is attaching cables, attaching programs, getting them into control, getting them under and bringing them in so that they'll fulfill the agenda at the top. And it's the same magic that's been being used through mass media, is that there's this agenda. It's very clear. This is what we're trying to do. So we're going to use this whole media structure and use all of our connections and networks. We own so much of this stuff or whatever to basically program all the people, just like sheep and initiates, to believing what we want them to believe so that we can fulfill our agenda. That's where the energetic feeding is going on, is it's actually to fulfill the agenda. They're using and taking the energy of the masses to do so. And also, as you said, feeding off of some of the energetic cords and threads that they've put out there to feed off of. The rage over Trump, for example, or the sexual hotness over some porn, or there's a variety of different ways that some of these entities are feeding off of the collective infrastructure of energy bodies. But it's totally a choice for every single individual. If you become aware of the fact that this system is trying to get you to do something that maybe not the thing that is actually your core soul impulse to do. And you suddenly decide, no, I'm going to do what I know is right. I'm going to filter this information. I'm going to listen deeper. I'm going to look for the truth. You basically took the red pill and you get ejected from the matrix. And then you're not in the matrix anymore. You're not in the battery anymore. You're not feeding this whole system. You're outside of that battery, but you're no less magical. You're not in the program. You can change the program, but you can also change the fabric of space even outside the program. And this is something that was in, the Matrix movies. Remember in the end of the second Matrix movie where Neo like short circuits the thing that's coming at him, and he's in the real world, he's in this crazy post-apocalyptic world, and somehow he stops the thing from attacking him even there. Well, that's the thing, is that it's not the program that contains the magic and the special power inside of you for sovereignty and creation. It's actually you that contains that. And you have that at every level of existence. So yes, you can change the rules of the matrix. You can change this program, and you can also ascend above it so that you're free from it and decide the rules that you're going to play with at that level as well. And this is a spiritual journey of moving through a field and deciding the rules that you're going to play with at each level that you develop.
Yeah, and that's a very Saturn energy, because the lowest level of Saturn is limitation or control or some sort of block, but the highest level is mastery and being a teacher and going through those initiations, because it also connects to rules. And we're in the Saturn square Neptune, and Neptune's very multidimensional and about the creative imagination. And then it's like we're being pushed to the edge. Like, do you want to change the rules? Because if not, here's some of the ramifications. And it's a really good aspect. It's a very challenging one. But that really connects with it. What are your thoughts about why there's such an antichrist sort of targeting on the divine feminine? that is so obvious and so much a part of all of it. What's the resentment there?
Well, it's tough to say. What in particular would you like to give an example of what it is that's brought that question forward for you?
Well, I guess like Mark Passio talks about the rituals and just the different numbers and symbology, and how it's really targeting the divine feminine and what we see in the world with the imbalance. And to me, it just seems to be a tactic to keep us from our divine blueprint. And it doesn't need names. It's just, as long as we're out of balance, we're easily controlled. And that happens to be a blueprint of divine union that represents that journey into the alchemical marriage, the Hieros Gamos and everything. But I was just wondering if there was anything else besides it just being a targeting on our energy bodies, if there's something specific about those beings, to anybody that out there that is just out to get, I guess it could go into like Lucifer Rebellion and some of those stories, but I don't know if there's any layers beyond that you have information about.
Yeah, well, definitely. There's
a big question, like hours of.
What'd you say?
We could spend hours on some of these questions.
Yeah, we could. But with recognition of time, I would say there's a couple things that are worth attending to. One is that, there were periods of time on this planet where the power of the divine feminine was really raised and honored. And there have been cultures that have really done that well. And even in some of those situations, there was also massive conflicts with the masculine desire of direction and control, and kind of somehow being in control and maintaining control, which is, it's innate. It's a part of us all. It's an aspect of us, and many of us have these different wounds on a spiritual level and traumas on a spiritual level that are related to that reptilian trauma we were talking about. And so each of us has different aspects of where we've either been victims of it or we've perpetrated it. And so we're still in that karmic healing cycle with all of that's happened a long time ago. And one of the places that you really see that is with the use of different initiates and channels, where you have basically oracles, women who would, for example, work at the Oracle of Delphi, and they would sit there and they would open up their channel and they would channel the truth and bring forward divine truth for the people. And a lot of times, unfortunately for them, this divine truth that came through these beautiful women was not in alignment with the agenda of whoever is in power. And so people in power become afraid that is going to turn people against them. And so they try to get rid of the oracles,
Right.
And that is the fundamental suppression of the divine feminine. And it's the same pattern that we see over and over again in different points in history, where the feminine, intuitive wisdom and community knowledge and the love that's present there is saying, look, this leadership is not working. This leadership is corrupt. There is a problem with this. This is not actually going to work for our children and our children's children. And they're pointing out the problem in the power structure, and the people that are in the power structure, which were often men who kind of put themselves there or whatever, claimed it, or, oh, by the power of force and my sword, I shall be this leader, then they're threatened by that. And whenever there's a threat, you want to suppress that threat. And that's the general dynamic. Now, when we come into this time period, it's really interesting because we have this incredible uprising of all this feminine wisdom again, right? And it's so funny to have some leader like Hillary, like up in this front of our face, because according to the women that I trust and listen to very intuitively, and as well as my own perception, she's not really very feminine at all. It's like she's a masculinized woman, and she's in this very masculinized approach and way of doing things. And I almost mourn for the deeper feminine inside of her, which feels like it's like trapped, it's like locked up, or it's been like pushed out so that she can do the, like, I'm going to be the commander-in-chief role. But the thing is people don't actually want that Hillary as the commander-in-chief. Right. People want the Hillary that is actually going to be honest and is going to be intuitive and is going to actually have emotion and care about the feelings of the people, which actually Bernie, even though he's an old man, actually has in some ways much more of the feminine consciousness in him. And it shows in his passion about these different social needs of the collective. It's a very interesting dynamic to watch play out.
Right. What about the MK Ultra though? Because there's, I know we got to close soon, but just like Kathy O'Brien's story, or the trauma-based mind control, or the minute you become president, in a way, there's this whole other shadow government that's really running the show. How can anybody really run and expect to knock that down? Because Eisenhower couldn't, Kennedy got assassinated. That's why I love what you said in the beginning about empowering the people, because they can't do it alone. So it's good to have somebody who has integrity in the office, but the work has to come from us. And that's what I get is what you've been saying pretty much.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you brought that up and you put it that way. I'd love to respond to that by just telling this little story of an experience that I just had last week.
And then go into what you're going to share at the conference, and you can just kind of meld the two together.
All right. That sounds good. So last week I went out to this lake by Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest, which is a forest in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Western North Carolina. It's a virgin forest. Trees have never been cut. Ancient woods, massive oak trees and ash and all of these other trees. And there's this beautiful lake. And it's interesting, but this area where we camped on the lake is actually called the Dragon's Tail. And there's still Christian churches, when you're driving there are Christian churches that have signs that say dragon slayers welcome. They still say this kind of stuff. And because the old Christian stories of killing the dragon, whatever, destroy the dragon, right? But the dragon is this consciousness that has to be integrated. It's here, it's present, it needs to be healed. And so much of the dragon is the good. It's the nature, it's the world, it's the perspective of Avalon, and the beauty of the round table was about realizing the medicine and the wisdom of the ancient dragon, the Pendragon, right? And the bringing together of the dragon with other beings and with other cultures and other ways of living. And the dragon meeting the cross, the Christian thing, is a pretty intense dialectic. But anyway, that's a tangent. I was on a tube floating on this warm, still lake at night, in the middle of the night, under clear, beautiful stars. And the sky was flashing with distant lightning, heat lightning. And we were watching starships come in and calling them in while we're floating on this beautiful world. And as we were watching the different ships come in and talking to them and calling them, we also were just kind of opening up to and talking about and thinking about what the pattern is here that's going on with this whole political process this year. And actually really dealing with the kind of heartache and mourning of the whole corruption of the DNC. It was during the middle of the convention. We were out there on this lake. It was Wednesday night, and seeing that and feeling that, and what is the point here? What's the purpose for things going down this way? Because we should have expected that the corruption, and we did to some extent expect that the corruption would do its darndest to keep the manipulation going and to keep the old family systems in line. Clinton, Bush, or Bush, Clinton, Bush, blah, 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 it's all one line all the way through here. And we as I was laying there, I started tuning in, and someone that was floating with me said, I really love Bernie. I love him as a person. I love his being. Right. And, I reflected on that, and I thought, you know what? I loved Obama too. I really loved him as a person. My mom loves him. He came to Asheville. I think he's actually moving here. And my mom met him, and there was this energy about him before he got into office that I really resonated with. I really felt like there was some spiritual consciousness coming in that leadership as he was coming in. And then it was completely lost. And then it was completely overrun when he was president, all the way until almost these last days, these last months he's been in the presidency. His joyful, young, impassioned being is coming out again, even though he's got gray hair. It's the pressure on him is lightening, and all of a sudden he's back in himself again, in this more honest, heart-centered being. And I tuned into Obama, and I'd had dreams with Obama before, and I've had these different contact moments with him. And I tuned into him, and I just contacted his consciousness, and I asked him, I said, Bernie, I said, Obama, tell me, what do you see going on here? How is this going to work out, that this is going down the way it is at the DNC? Tell me what your perception of all of this is. And his consciousness came in super strong, and it was he was floating above me in the stars. I was like, whoa. And I felt his presence, and he said, he just sent me this consciousness, and he said to me, do you really think Bernie could do what he was trying to do inside the White House? He's like, it is locked down in here. It's crazy. The transmission that he gave me of the feeling of being completely just bound and chained and locked and trying to nudge something with your head or your elbow or whatever was just horrifying. I mean, and just so intense. And he said, you know what, this game has been rigged, and of course it's going to continue. It's like they're going to keep rigging the game. And he says, but Bernie has the ability to do what Al Gore did, which is that by not being president, he actually has so much more freedom. And he can do the same thing for the social and environmental justice movement that Al Gore did for the environmental movement. So for the green movement, because Al Gore didn't get presidency, but then he made that film. And right at that time, we were all doing all this big magic, trying to open up the green companies and bring all this attention to environmentalism. And sure enough, massive explosion, the green revolution, all these companies showed up, all this energy and movement showed up, focused on environmentalism. And Bernie has the power to do that outside the system too.
That's really awesome and encouraging, and really important to look at, because I mean, leadership is leadership. I mean, it's what we choose to empower that creates leaders. And if we believe in somebody and we are in resonance with it, I mean, that's where it's at. Al Gore gets a lot of criticism, and I never wanted to dive into it enough to, I mean, the green revolution is huge. So
yeah,
I'll just leave it at that, and good that doorway got open. So, at Asetti Ranch, September 29th, the weekend of September 29th to October 2nd. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to bring to the table. You've got 4 hours altogether, and one of the segments will be, more physical, but we only have a couple minutes, so just a quick summary, and I'll be sharing the links and people will be able to read. But
sure. Yeah. At ECETI, I'm going to basically dive into exploring our different interstellar relationships with different species. And so we're going to be looking at qualities of some of the different species across the galaxy, and looking at the sort of innate cues and qualities inside of each of us that are participating in the workshop that can tell us maybe who our star family is, where we came from. Because most of us have not actually, originated and evolved on this earth forever. We came to this planet at some point from somewhere else. And by getting to know these different star species and to getting to know these parts of ourselves, we become more deeply empowered to make contact with our star family. And so I'm hoping that we get tuned in to our different star families, and then we'll go out at night and we'll call in some ships. Nice. And we'll actually hang out with those star families. And it's a profoundly deeper experience, making contact and seeing a starship and having a telepathic contact with star beings, when you feel and have the capacity to know how deeply that species actually is your family. Yeah. They're not foreign. They're not these others. They're actually your family, and it's a reunion. And that experience of reunion for me has been one of the most powerful and beautiful experiences of my lifetime.
Well, I'm so incredibly grateful that you're going to be joining us. You're bringing such a profound energy to that event, and you do for the planet.
Thank you.
And you've been doing this mission work for a very long time, and very conscious of your role, and it's just so excellent. And thank you so much for this interview, and I really look forward to connecting in September. And everybody join us. This is going to be an amazing weekend, and we'll walk away just probably incredibly grateful that we did it. So anyway, thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's been such a pleasure.
Okay, great. Bye.
Bye. Aloha.